Welcome everyone. Just like Wendy had said earlier, we're really very grateful to have everyone joining us this afternoon. And our two speakers, we're very excited about them both. They are two women that we have great respect for. I'm gonna start first of all by introducing the first speaker, which is Beverly Powell. Like, I can't do it justice doing the introduction for our bio, but we'll kind of keep it simple and short. Beverly Powell, she's an experienced equality, diversity, and inclusion senior leader, and she's the winner of multiple national awards for her contributions towards equality, diversity, and inclusion. Her 25 career in equality, diversity, and inclusion has encompassed both the public and private sectors, and our outstanding leadership has led to successful strategic outcomes for a range of organizations. She's an accredited life coach, a qualified police facilitator. She's a mentor. She's a transformational leader for the National Leadership Academy. She's the author of the research study, A Critical Analysis of the Transgender Experience when Accessing Primary and Secondary Care within the NHS. She's committed to her work, and her specialist expertise have resulted in her receiving commendation from the police and prison services for leadership, commitment to the equality and fairness agenda. And our innovative work has resulted in strategies that have led to sustainable commitment to progression, development, and transformation within a range of public sector organizations. So this is just a short bio about Beverly. I could go on and on. And before we call Beverly to go on, I will just use the opportunity as well to tell you about our second speaker, so that when the time comes, it's just to kind of invite her to the stage. Our second speaker is Evelyn Asante Mensah, OBE. She's the chair of Penning Care NHS Foundation Trust. Evelyn was appointed chair of the Penning Care NHS Foundation Trust, which runs mental health and learning disability services across Greater Manchester in 2017. She has worked at a senior level in health, education, and housing, as well as the voluntary and community sectors for over 25 years. During this time, Evelyn contributed to the development and implementation of policy at local level, regional, and national level. She currently sits on the National NHS Confederation Mental Health Network Board. Among Evelyn's notable roles, she was the chair of Central Manchester Primary Care Trust, and then the NHS Manchester over a 12-year period, also holding a board level role at Manchester Mental Health and Social Care Trust. She's passionate about tackling inequalities in health and social care and promoting equality and diversity. She's a member of the NHS Confederation Black Leadership Network and was previously a commissioner on the Equality and Human Rights Commission. She's also co-chair of the BAME Advisory Group, NHS Northwest, alongside Bill McCarthy, Executive Regional Director for the NHS Northwest. And she was awarded an OBE in 2006 for services to ethnic minorities in the field of health. So you can see when I said that the two speakers that we have today, we are really excited about them, and we look forward to it, and we're sure you're gonna have a good time. We just want to invite Beverly Powell now to start our presentation. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. Sometimes I often wonder if that is actually me. I struggle with that sort of biography, but actually it is the work that I've done. So thank you very much for reminding me of the work that I've done. I'm going to provide you with a brief overview. A question that I'm often asked is to share with groups, individuals, my own leadership journey. And I'm always fascinated as to why I'm asked to do this. Perhaps it's because it's a non-traditional route. If we look at how some professionals move on through their career, mine has been a non-traditional route to where I am today. So what I want to say as well before I begin my presentation is just to say that this is just a story. I believe that everybody has a story. Everybody has their own story. And so this is just my story. I don't believe it's remarkable in any way. That's my own view. But there is a story in everybody. And if you feel that your story can empower and inspire others, then I would encourage you to reflect on your own story and share that with others. Thank you, Wendy. Next slide, please. So the topic today I was asked was to look at everyday courage, and I think this was the hashtag that we had for International Women's Day. So I'm just going to share with you some reflections and life lessons that I've learned throughout my own personal career, potted along the way. Next slide, please. One of the things that I always look to is the term noblesse oblige, and that's a term I use in terms of it's an obligation to improve social justice. So when I reflect on my own career, what I have found is that noblesse oblige, an obligation. I've always felt that there's been an obligation to improve social justice because of the work that I've actually done. And in terms of leadership, there's power, influence, and privilege, which I may have used throughout my own journey. These are things that I've identified only, I guess, over the last few years when I've actually looked at my career journey and looked at, I don't know, nursing, excuse me, do you have a thing called, is it critical incidents? So when you have a critical incident, you sit down, you reflect, or you look at the reflective model, you go through the experiential learning cycle, and you look at what was the situation, what worked or what didn't work, what can I do better to improve. So I've sat down over the last 2 years and looked at my own career journey and looked at some commonalities there. And one of the things that I have found is that it would appear throughout my career, I have felt within myself an obligation to improve social justice, hence my career to date. Next slide, please. So the journey begins. I've marked critical events. One of the things that I've noticed throughout my career is I have taken some high-risk strategies, some very high-risk strategies, and they have worked. But in terms of leadership, often you are called to take high-risk strategies, and it's up to yourselves if you want to consider that. I have taken lots of high-risk strategies along my own leadership journey as a Black woman, and they have brought about new beginnings. But also with new beginnings, they've also brought about challenges. Challenges because of my gender, because of my race, because of my social class, and also because of my region. So because many of you may have noticed my accent isn't a Yorkshire accent. I'm a Lancashire girl. I'm from Bolton. I'm from Greater Manchester, and that's where my heart lies, in Lancashire. And quite often along my journey, particularly my earlier journey, I do recall speaking to my supervisor during my first degree when I was at Bath University. I'll say Bath. In Lancashire, we say Bath University. And I remember presenting some research, and my peers would find that amusing, even though it was critical work that I was presenting, and it was because of my accent. And I recall having the supervision conversation and saying, suggesting that for me to move on through my career, maybe I need to consider changing my accent to be taken seriously. She said something to me that I found very profound, and it's always stuck with me. And she asked me why I would want to change my accent. Why would I want to be the same as everybody else? Why not use my difference for the benefit of others? And perhaps if I am presenting something, if my accent is not regional to the space that I'm working in, maybe that will encourage people to listen more. And I did think about that more, and I thought, well, actually, yes, you're right. So there's an element in me in my earlier years of wanting to maybe fit in, to be accepted. And now I'm absolutely embracing along my leadership journey who Beverly Powell is. So I've grown into Beverly Powell. Next slide, please. So my critical pathway is just a very quick walkway, but there's been some critical turning points for me. My first degree was a turning point, and lots of things started to happen there. My first degree involved criminology, and I studied psychology and lots of other ologies, which helped me. During that time, I was employed by Greater Manchester Police. So I spent 14, 15 years with Greater Manchester Police. And what I found, again, reflecting on my career, every 2 years, it would appear that I moved into different areas of work. Was it intentional? But it appears that I had a different mentor every 2 years, I had a different coach, and I moved on and progressed into different areas. During 14 years, during that time, I was there with Greater Manchester Police staff, I was, and during that time was the untimely murder of Stephen Lawrence. And at that time, we decided, myself and other colleagues, to mobilise and develop the very first Black and Asian Police Association, 2004. So we looked at assisting the organisation and working amongst ourselves to address the lack of progression, retention of staff who were coming in as officers or police staff, and a whole amalgam of different things that was occurring at the time in Greater Manchester. Green Haze, Moss Side as it was, gun crime, issues in Oldham, Rochdale. There was a lot of things during that period throughout my time. During that time, the third critical area for me around my career, when I think about it, I decided to take a career break. During that career break, I decided to retrain and go into teaching. And I taught in an all-girls school in Manchester for a brief period of time. From that time, I then realised that there was another world outside Greater Manchester Police. So I went back after the career break and realised that actually I've taken a big step here. And whilst I thought I would finish my career and pension in Greater Manchester, I recognised there was a big wide world out there. And so I applied for a job and was appointed part of the senior management team in a local prison. At the time I was appointed, the Home Office was looking to appoint external diversity managers because of the untimely murder of the young teenager in a young offenders institution, Zaid Mubarak. Zaid Mubarak, for anybody who isn't familiar with Zaid's story, he was a young offender, first-time offender, Muslim youth who was put into a cell with a racist Robert Stewart. Robert Stewart would tell everybody along in the prison what he was going to do to Zaid Mubarak. Zaid called out his concerns to his family who would visit him. They raised their concerns, and exactly what Robert Stewart said he was going to do happened. So he was beaten to death by Robert Stewart in his prison cell. So an inquiry came out, and one of those many recommendations, like the Stephen Lawrence, McPherson recommendations, was to look at diversity and inclusion in the delivery. So I was appointed into a local category B men's prison. My criminology and psychology grounding helped me, and my leadership helped me to address and understand some of the issues and report into the #1 governor to address issues of race, single cell accommodation, a number of different things. So that was one critical incident experience that I had. The outcome of that was that I and other senior leaders managed to get the prison to where they needed to get to, into that standard, and I was invited to work at Manchester Prison, which I subsequently decided it was time to move on, having worked in the prison service, had the experience that I needed, and I then wanted to move on. So then I arrived into the NHS, and I do recall that after my interview and assessment, the feedback that I did receive at that time was, even though you don't have experience in the NHS, you have vast experience of navigating through complex bureaucratic systems and proven track record. So I was appointed into the NHS at a time when we needed to have the single equality scheme. For anybody who remembers, we used to have the race equality, the gender, the disability. They were all separate, and I was invited. One of my first tasks was to provide a strategic overview plan of one single equality scheme. So I was there. From there, in a local acute sector in Yorkshire, so I relocated. So I left family and friends, high risk strategy, to go and work and live in Yorkshire, and worked in the acute sector. A couple of years later, I was appointed into regional area. So I was responsible in Yorkshire and Humber for talent and inclusion. So I covered the area where I'm presenting to now, Yorkshire and Humber, the whole of the region around that. During that time, I studied for my master's, which was diversity and strategic management. And that's where, as Abby has pointed out, I did some work there around the transgender agenda and accessing primary care for marginalised groups. I also developed and worked as a coach. And so then we had a changing of the guard, and the regional leadership academies merged, and I was then appointed into the National Leadership Academy and had a variety of different roles, working directly under WREN with the assessment of the BAME risk assessments. And then I was invited to work for the new National Director of Leadership and Talent, Jacqueline Davis. So that's where I am currently, working for Jacqueline Davis, and supporting her work in terms of assurance, policy, governance, right across nationally, talent and inclusion and leadership. Next slide, please. So I put this slide up, that slide, because can we just see the caption underneath? Because that seems to have summed up a lot of my career, where I tend to sit at a panel with people who do not reflect or look like me, and often asked, can I describe what I can bring to this company? Something, a position that I'm familiar with. So that's why I put that slide there. So in terms of legacy, when I think about my career journey, next slide, please, Wendy, thank you. Legacy is so important, and I'd invite you all to think about what is your own leadership legacy. So a legacy plants the seeds from which consistency and expectation sprouts, and in turn can become an organisational funnel for future performance, driven by historical decisions, driven by one's personal values. So my personal values, and as I mentioned right at the beginning, noblesse oblige, an obligation to readdress some of the imbalances around social justice. And it takes me back through my career and the work that I have wanted to do, because I felt driven and because it aligns with my values as well. Next slide, please. This badge was the badge, funnily enough, and again, I find it very strange when I reflect on my career, was the badge of my school, my secondary school, the all-girls school that I went to. And it really aligns with me. I've always felt to be a servant leader, service before self was a motto at my secondary school. So I wore that badge on my left lapel for 5 years. So in reality, the transition to a culture of a servant leader cannot be made overnight. The way that you choose to serve and lead may not always be welcomed overnight and embraced by everyone. Being a leader can be a lonely journey. And my own journey has been very lonely in many instances. There's been times where I've been the lone voice. There's been the time where I've sat round the table and been the only person reflected my race, reflecting my people, my culture, a variety of different things. So it's not an easy journey, but it's a journey that I have chosen to take on and do and enjoy. And it's been a challenge, but for me, it's around making a difference. And if I can make a difference in a small space, it's like a drop in the pool, in an ocean, and make a ripple, then I believe my work is done. So for me, leadership can be a lonely journey, but it's about understanding what drives you, what your motivation is, and who and what you want to serve, and your legacy. What is it that you want to take with you? What do you want people to remember you for? Not just your identity, but the work that you actually do. What is it that drives you and you're passionate about, and the difference that you make? Many times I hear people talk about, we have listened, we have heard. Well, I guess as a transformational coach, one thing I'm always keen to portray is, what is the action after that? Because often it can be quite passive. You can listen, you can hear, but it's the so what next? What are you going to do, or what are others going to do? So it's important for me to take on the transformational piece as well. Listen, hear, and understand. There's another element around knowing oneself. So understanding oneself is also a very good starting point. Need to understand ourselves, what drives us. I was asked a question a month ago, and that really set me back. It's a question nobody's asked me for a long time. And it was a retired nurse who asked me, what drives you, Beverly? And that's a question I don't always get asked. And that was an interesting one. And that took me right back to that badge, service before self. It took me right back to my family. It took me right back to the experiences that I had a child. It took me right back to my mother and father's experiences. It took me right back to my social class. It took me right back to my primary school. It took me right back to watching as a child the race riots and all the stop and search and all those things that was happening. So what drives me are those things. Quite simply, are those things. Next slide, please. So for a woman of colour, or a woman such as myself, thriving in this world, I use the acronym VUCA, which is, we need to be able to understand how to thrive in a volatile, uncertain world, working with complexity and ambiguity, I beg your pardon. So the World Economic Forum also highlight a number of top leadership skills that we need to have. And there's three that really chime for me. And one of those is working with innovation, working with complexity, and working with ambiguity. And those are three top things that the World Economic Forum talk about for the leaders for the future. That's what we need to do. And we can see this with complexity. Nothing is straightforward anymore. Working with ambiguity, I can be doing one piece of work, then something else has to be dropped, or that piece of work runs alongside, or these tight deadlines. And working with uncertainty. This is the world that we find ourselves in. The circle on the left there, I put, what is your why? If we understand why we're doing this, then that will help to focus us on our own leadership journey, on the work that we're actually doing. What is your why? Next slide, please. One of the lessons that I've learned, or lesson 3, is maintaining a shift in mindset. So the old world, if we look at the old systems and how they were built, it was the chief exec, the board, the executive. They had the knowledge, they had the power. If we move into the 21st century, it's more aligned with systems working, different systems, cross-sectional working, multi-professional leadership. There's no us and them, it's we together. And again, going back to those top skills, working with complexity, ambiguity, that image there on the right really shouts out. And that's to say that I've worked along my own leadership journey, working with complexity, ambiguity, uncertainty, and in my personal life, taking high-risk strategies, working and not knowing the end results, but knowing what my values are and what I wanted to do is what has driven me. Next slide, please. It's very often, we will sit with discomfort. We need to sit with it. It's uncomfortable. Sometimes we may fill in the gaps, as I guess as a coach. I will always have that discussion with a colleague. If they're uncomfortable with something, understanding that, what are your values? What is it that makes you feel sit with discomfort? So I thought that image was quite useful around understanding why we may feel uncomfortable with things and why our colleagues, if we're discussing something, having that conversation we need to have as a leader. It's around sitting with discomfort, and sometimes some discussions are uncomfortable, but we need to pass through those, and we need to work why there is either resistance or why we try and resist it or others try to resist it. I think that's a powerful image. Next slide, please. Staying relevant is really important as a leader. So the way I used to lead many years ago, the way I used to lead in the police service, the way I used to lead in the prison service, I got a shock in the NHS that we lead differently. We lead with compassion, we lead with empathy, we lead in a different way than a way that I would have led as a leader working in a different system, as in the prison service or in other areas of my career throughout my journey. So being relevant is absolutely key. And the slide there just highlights from the fourth industrial revolution, steam-based water, electrical mass-produced in 19th, 20th century, computer and internet-based knowledge in the 20th century, and then 21st, artificial intelligence, information technology, cyber, internet, confluence and congruence into the early 21st century. So it's about staying relevant. And Tony Robbins, the international life coach, also talks about that. If we always do what we've always done, and we all know this, you will always get what you've always got. So along my leadership journey, I have tried not to always do the same thing. I embrace difference. Next slide, please. Really important, and even more so the last 12 months for me as a leader, is to have good mental health. It's so important, and I feel it's going to be more important over the next 12 months and beyond. Good mental health is absolutely key, and that is the thing that has driven me along my own leadership journey. As we've said, or as I have said, the leadership journey can be lonely, and what's helped me and stabilized me and kept me grounded is to ensure that my practice in terms of ensuring I have good mental health is absolutely key. So that's one of the key learning points for me as a leader. Next slide, please. No more slides?
Can you not see them?
Yes, there was one before, I think. Was there one previous?
Yes. Let me see if I can.
So I'll run through this one anyway. So what you know is who you know.
Okay, this one.
Yeah, that one. That is just a lesson for myself in terms of making work fun. It's really important. I know it's difficult where we find ourselves in, but if we can find any elements of having fun, and that's me just having fun. So on the top left there, we hosted a regional event for BAME women pre-COVID. We hosted that in Leeds. That was a wonderful event with Professor Yudi Archibong and a number of keynote speakers there, Professor Carol Baxter. And we really dived into things around leadership, talent, and women of colour. In the bottom right there, it was a BAME network with nurses in Calderdale and Huddersfield at that time. Again, I was invited as a speaker to share and learn with other wonderful, inspiring, fabulous nurses. So making work fun is a key lesson and something that we need to have and build in, and look to build that in, even if it's 5 minutes of fun. Fun is a good thing. I was thinking the other week, when was the last time I actually laughed? I mean, really laughed from my belly. I may have smiled, but really laughed. So that's something I'm working on, is really having fun and finding fun along the way. Next slide, please. Build and maintain your networks is so important. And as I've grown along my leadership journey, my networks have changed. I've moved from one network to another network. So one network one size does not always fit all. So working in different areas and systems that I've worked in over the years, different networks are so important. So maintain and build your networks. Harvard Business Review highlighted 3 key areas in terms of networks. And quite often the study finds that many colleagues, professionals only operate in 2 levels: the operational and the developmental. So having a network is about operating across 3 levels: operationally, developmentally, strategically. And those are 3 areas that I take on board throughout my leadership career, or I try to, in the best way that I can. Next slide, please. So I think I've covered that. So I may have covered the whole of the presentation. Gratitude is important, and that's part of my own personal practice as a leader. Particularly over the last 12 months, my own practice in terms of gratitude has become even stronger. And that's a practice that I choose to have as a leader, and I feel that's important. Next slide, please. Guard your dreams and ambitions. Something I've learned over my leadership career is guarding my dreams and my ambitions. Quite often, not everybody buys into your dream, doesn't understand your vision, and sometimes your dreams can get smashed. So I've learned through having coaches or mentors that I guard my dreams, and I will share those with those who understand, who buy in, or my network who understand my dreams and ambitions. So guarding your dreams, or my dreams and ambitions, has been absolutely key in helping me to get where I am today. Next slide, please. And as I said right at the beginning, really, leadership legacy is so important. You know, what do you want to leave as a leader? What is your legacy? What do you want to impart on others? What do you want to learn from others? Leadership legacy is absolutely critical. And that's just a snapshot of some of the things that I'm proud and humbled to have been involved in, and hopefully left some shape, some kind of legacy in terms of my own leadership journey. Thank you. I think that might be the last slide. Oh, I put this slide in because I'm often asked, or most recently I've been asked, what is it you're reading at the moment? So these are 4 books that I have on the go. The Good Ancestor, How to Think Long-Term in a Short-Term World, is a really good book. The book talks about working towards supporting your ancestors, 4 ancestors behind you, or 4 into the next. So being a good ancestor is around leadership as well. Being an Anti-Racist, really good book. I would recommend that. Sticking with that, I'm working with that with a group of allies, and we're looking at that book. There's also a workbook. You can get that on Amazon. Black and British, we have Dr. David Olusago, who's going to be presenting on the 23rd of March, I believe, at one of our national seminars. Ibram Kandi also presented, and he was excellent as well. So I'm reading that work. It's important for me as a leader to understand me, myself, my history. So Black and British, Forgotten History, is really important. The Truth About Talent, my current boss, Jacqueline Davis, wrote that book, and it's always good to read a book that your boss has wrote. Next slide. And I think that's it, that's the end really. So questions, Q&A, have you mapped out your own critical pathway? What is your own leadership legacy? What has this presentation inspired you to do personally? When will you do this? And what difference will this make? Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Beverly. That was such a brilliant presentation. I could see Allison's hands up. We have some questions in the chat box. So should I quickly go through that first? And then we could see if we could take from. So we have the first question, and that's from Allison Thompson. And the question is, who has influenced you most in your career and how? Then we have another. Do you want to take that first? Could we be able to?
I'll take that one first, Abby, because I'll probably forget if I move on to something else. Oh, there's been so many influences, but you know, it has to have to give that one up to my mother. My mother brought 3 of us up as a single parent. We was written off because we was single parents in a council estate. I didn't pass my 11 plus. My mother feels as though I'm still scarred by that. And we was written off. And my brother worked as an officer in the RAF right throughout his career and was a pilot. And my sister has her own company and she works as a social worker. So considering we was all written off, and I have to give props to my mother for that, who worked single-handedly to craft, and I looked at her as a role model. So Alison, it's got to my mother.
Thank you very much. Just before I go to the next question, there is on the chat box a question by Julie. You wanted to know if we're going to be able to share the presentation after. Wendy will be able to share it, aren't we? Yeah.
Yes, we will
So
be
we'll be able to
sharing
share that
this.
one. Yeah. Thank you very much for that. And then I'm conscious of the time now because I know we have the second speakers as well coming. The second question is from Caroline Dada. Caroline wants to know what has been your biggest challenge and how did you overcome this? What is your biggest challenge now?
Yeah, so many challenges, but one of the big ones that stands out in my mind is being a senior leader, Black woman working in a prison, working in a category B men's prison, managing white men who thought in a certain way, seeing 30% of the prison population being Black men. And so lots of challenges. I guess some of my academic grounding and leadership, I drew on that. It was a challenging experience, but I still drove through with what I was tasked to do. But in terms of being a leader, I think that was one of my most challenging leadership roles that I had. But I wouldn't have given up that experience for the world because it made a difference.
I'm just going to ask this last question of the chat box. And I think what we do then is we'll go to the second speakers. And if anyone has any questions after that, we could take it together then. So the last question there is from Mano. The question is, do you think people stereotype you for your sex and color less than they used to?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would certainly say so. Perhaps, I don't know if it's indicative of the change in culture, or is it me who's grown as a leader and able to have those discussions and challenge and sit with discomfort. But I would certainly say that the perception of me, of Beverly Powell, has changed markedly. But then again, Beverly Powell has changed from a number of years ago as well. Great question.
Thank you very much, Beverly. The questions could go on and on. I'm sure there are some of us that still have questions. I do have questions for you, but I think I will save it for now. And I think
please email me any questions should you have any through Wendy, and I'll be happy to respond to any.
Thank you very much. I think we're just gonna go straight now to the second speakers, which is Evelyn. Evelyn, you could go on now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I just want to say, I'm sitting here in awe of Beverly, and very inspired by what you've just shared with us. And actually, I'm a Lancashire lass myself, so and a lot of the areas you were talking about really resonated and rang a bell. And I think it's always hard to live up to how you're introduced, isn't it? And I'm like you, Beverly, often wonder if I am that person that they're speaking about. But it's things that, again, like you, I have done. But I want to thank Abby and Wendy for asking me to come and share my experiences and thoughts with you. And it's a real privilege to be here. And I was asked as well to share my story and journey, and not being technologically savvy, you're not getting a great PowerPoint. I'm just going to talk to you. And there were two parts of the questions about talking about my experience, and then it was about achieving an equal future in a COVID world. And thinking about that element of the question, I thought, actually, we know COVID is going to be with us, but actually it's not about achieving equality or equal future in a COVID world. It's about equality. And COVID has provided us with a very particular context within which we are at the moment. And over the last 12 months, it's been a major challenge for all of us. I've been working from home and shielding since the beginning of February 2020. I can remember the day when I was sent home by our director of people and workforce following a conversation with the chief exec. And we were about to, we were talking about doing some interviewing for a medical director. And Nikki came into my office and said, Claire and I have been talking and we've been thinking about whether you should be involved in the interviews because we were looking at doing them face to face. And I said, well, things will be fine. And they said, well, no, I don't think so. And I was unceremoniously packed off the trust, out of trust headquarters and sent home. And I've been working from home since. And it's been a real challenge in providing leadership when you can't physically be in the same place, in the same room as everybody else. And also for me, the pandemic has shone a real light on the inequalities that exist. And we've seen how it's impacted on people from Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities and many other disadvantaged people. And it's not new. It's felt at times as if suddenly we've realized that Black people exist, that there are inequalities, but actually this is something that's been happening for decades and decades and decades, and what COVID did was just hold the light up. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my history. I'm Ghanaian. I'm not sure whether to call myself first generation or not, because I came here when I was 5. My parents brought me here because they wanted to give me a better life and opportunities that they felt I wouldn't get back home in Ghana. And my dad was a trade unionist, but he came here and he ended up working in a factory. And my mum was a teacher back in Ghana, and she came and she got a job in Lewis's department store. I don't know if anybody remembers Lewis's department store, but it was huge in Manchester. And then she retrained. She did a number of other jobs. And I remember she used to get up and she used to do a cleaning job. And then she'd go and she'd do her substantive job. And on weekends, she would take me with her to do her cleaning job. And I remember going into the precinct in Mosside, TSB Bank, and being really embarrassed because my friends could see me because she'd go on a Saturday when everybody was out. But she then retrained and in catering and then ended up working the rest of her career in the NHS. And I remember watching her and watching in terms of her progression, she never really progressed. And that she ended up training people who came in, she trained them and then they became her boss. And I remember thinking, I don't want to do that and I'm never going to go into the NHS, and look where I am now. They wanted a better life for me and opportunities. And as I said before, I thank them for that. But I didn't take the pathway that they would have liked me to take. I come from a family where education was very important. They wanted me to go to school, they wanted me to go to college and university. And then, like majority of Ghanaian and African parents, they expected me to become a doctor or a lawyer. Didn't do any of that. Achievement was very high on their agenda, and but I didn't go to university after college. I became a single mum. I had my son at 20, and he was quickly followed by my oldest daughter when I was about 22. Throughout time, I did a number of admin and clerical jobs. Some of them were mind-numbing, boring. I was a filing clerk for a credit card company, and what I did literally was what the job said on the tin, filed all day. I worked in an insurance company. I worked at Loretto College, which I loved on one level, but it's there where I experienced racism, low expectations. I would watch as how Black students were channeled down vocational routes, whereas white students were channeled down more academic pathways. Um, I was asked really strange things, which, you know, now we call microaggressions, but things like, could people touch my hair? Did I eat chips at home? Some really bizarre questions that you just think, I'm not sure why that came out of your mouth, but it did. But I was young and I was grateful to have a job, but I was beginning to increasingly feel like I wanted more. And I didn't want to believe that that was it for me, that that's where I was going to stay forever. Um, so I got another job in Manchester City Council. It was still doing admin, but it was a different environment, and I felt would give me more opportunities. I also started to think about going back into education to do more, and that if I wanted to progress, then I would need to go back into education. But I didn't know what to do because I didn't have a first degree. Um, and I wanted to be a role model for my children, and felt that education was going to be my key. So I found a course at Manchester Metropolitan University in Women's Studies, and it was a new course, and it was a course that I didn't need to do a first degree. To get on the course, I needed to write an essay, and I thought, well, I can do that. So I wrote an essay, and actually, I don't believe that I don't think I thought I would get on it, but I did, and it really opened up just my networks, and opened up my mind, and opened up a whole range of possibilities. And I'm actually now an alumni at Manchester Metropolitan University and sit as a governor on the board. And I think it's so important for people to see people like me in those positions, and to believe that actually, you know, you can get there. It's hard work. And as Beverly says, sometimes it's lonely. But you can do it, and you need a lot of strategies and support to do it. The course was part-time. I continued to work for the local authority in homelessness. My older two children will give testimony that I used to drag them with me to lectures, and the university was also my childcare. So they would sit at the back of the lecture hall having their chips, because I was that great a parent, and I would be there at the lectures. But it was important, because what I actually wanted them to see was that education and university institutions were not closed spaces, and were places that everybody could go into, and that actually that they could also achieve. I was working for the local authority while I was at uni. I then left because my job was in a single homeless hostel, and it would have meant that I would have had to be called out, and sometimes those call outs were at night, and it would have meant leaving my children, and I just couldn't do that on a consistent basis. I went to work in the voluntary sector, first with young people, and then I moved into health in the 90s, and that's where I've been since. I started off at an organisation called BHAF, which brings back fun, wonderful memories. It was a sexual health project working around HIV at the very, and there are so many parallels for me in terms of the way people dealt with HIV and the way that we've dealt with COVID. Some of the messaging is quite scary that we haven't learned from, from illnesses like HIV. So I was at BHAF, which we later became the Black Health Agency for about 14, 15 years. And the organization went through lots of development. And I got to a point where I thought I'd taken the organization as far as I could personally take it, and it needed somebody else. But I also was, I had itchy feet, but I was scared. I was scared of moving on because I knew BHA, I knew it like the back of my hand, and on a level, it was easy. So I needed to find a way that I could move on. And so I went to government office for the Northwest as a strategic advisor on diversity and community cohesion. And when I say I moved out of BHA wasn't the frying pan, but I moved into the fire. I had no idea what working within the civil service was going to be like. And I'd worked in the voluntary sector for a long time and went into an environment where I was the only Black person on a floor, that the culture was so alien to me that I really struggled for a while, because I was trying to be something that I just really wasn't. I was trying to fit into their mold. And the day, and I've said this lots of times before, realized that I wasn't a white man was a revelation, because then I could be who I was, and realized that actually they didn't want me because I was going to emulate their behavior. They wanted me because I was bringing something very different into the organization. And I think that for my career pathway, there's been lots of times where I've been the only Black person or person of color in the room. And sometimes that's hard. Sometimes the culture of the organization enables you to thrive and for you to grow. I didn't actually plan my career pathway or think that I would end up in leadership or management. To be honest, I didn't really know what I was, where I was going to end up. But I knew that what I wanted to do was something that was around social justice. It was around tackling inequalities that exist. And that's what led me to the things that I have done. I've learned a lot on my leadership journey. I think we all do. And the biggest thing I've learned is the importance of always staying true to yourself and not conforming to stereotypes, whether that's stereotypes because of your gender, stereotype because of your ethnicity and race. We shouldn't try to mold ourselves into how others might think we should be or how we think others want us to be. And trying to be someone else never ever works. It might work for a little while, but it just doesn't work. And I think my government office example just showed me that I just couldn't be the suited and booted person that I thought they were expecting. But all of that can and does at times make you vulnerable and makes you feel vulnerable. And even if you sit where I sit at the moment, and it's a real privilege, I absolutely recognize the privilege that I have in being chair of an organization, and metaphorically sitting at the top of the tree. It doesn't leave you, I'm not sure if this is a word, invulnerable. Um, and it's a real privilege for me to be where I am. But you still need psychological safety. Psychological safety for me is hugely, hugely important. And your organization needs to have a culture that is safe. Quite often, we think we'll solve our diversity issue by bringing people from different backgrounds in, different gender, disability. However, the culture of our organization isn't ready for those people. And then we wonder why they don't thrive. I've learned to live with my insecurities because I believe everybody has them. But as a Black woman, this has been really hard. I felt a lot that I have to be so much better than my peers. And sometimes, like, I'm expected to be representative of all Black women, of all Black people, that I will know and understand all Black culture. And that I was once, and this was at Loreto, so it was many, many years ago, when I was leaving Loreto, part of the speech, and I think I was meant to feel really good about, was I was told that because I'd been such a good worker, I'd paved the way for other people of colour to come into the organisation. So imagine if they thought I'd been rubbish, there'd never been another Black person who would have been employed by Loreto College. I've worked in spaces where I've experienced racism, as I've said, and I remember very early on in my chair career, I was asked if I would chair a cancer peer review. And I just said yes. I hadn't really thought about what that would mean. And I think that had I thought about it, I would have said no. And when Beverly was talking about risks, I think sometimes I have said yes to things that have been risky. And it's been a good thing. Because on this cancer peer review that we was doing, I had the responsibility to pick the team. And to be honest, I was really intimidated by some of the people that were in the room. And I remember there was a consultant oncologist who I just felt didn't like me, and I didn't understand, I wasn't quite sure why. And he kept asking me what my background was and where I was from and what I did. And I was getting more and more anxious, thinking this person could make my life really miserable. And then I realized that actually in that room, I had the power because I was the one that was going to pick who sat on the team. And that I didn't need to pick him. And actually also that part of, he didn't rate me because I wasn't a clinician, because I was a woman, because I was Black, and because I was young. So there was a whole raft of things in my basket that he just couldn't cope with. But once I recognized what my power was and my position and how I could use it, not that I didn't want people who would disagree with me, but I think that sometimes we need to recognize where our recognize the battles that we choose to fight and how we fight them. I think on my journey, allies have been really important, and it's really important to have allies, but for allies to recognize the difference between an ally and a savior. I don't need saving, but I do need allyship. And I need to know that when I'm not in a room, you know, those allies will take up the issues and will speak on behalf of people. They won't try and save me. And throughout my career, there's been women and men, but mainly women, who have come in and who provided me with support when I felt very, very vulnerable. And two people who have stuck in my mind: a friend who was a neighbour, but she now lives in Devon. When I was really struggling with my master's degree, she was a researcher at Manchester University, and she used her budget to buy me all the resources that I needed for my dissertation, something that, you know, as a single mum, I wouldn't have been able to afford. And actually, in terms of the new readings and things that were out there, it was just phenomenal. The other person was a woman called Professor Joan Higgins, and she was the chair of Manchester Health Authority when I was a non-executive, and she helped me find my voice. I used to make myself disappear at the board meetings because I didn't think that I had anything that anyone would want to say. And she told me something that has stuck in my mind, that I didn't know what some others sat round the table knew, but they didn't know what I knew or my experience, and they were just as valid and of equitable value. And so I say all the time, always remember to live your truth, and that what you bring is enough, and it is more than enough. I think that I remember reading a quote from Jacinda Ardern, who is the New Zealand's Prime Minister, and that also struck a chord with me. What she said was, one of the criticisms she'd faced over the years was that she wasn't aggressive enough or assertive enough, or maybe somehow because she was empathetic, it meant she was weak. And she said, I totally rebel against that. I refuse to believe that you can't be both compassionate and strong. And Beverly talked about compassion. And for me, that, you know, I completely believe in showing vulnerability is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. You don't need to be bullish to gain respect. And as a leader, I've always tried to be approachable and open. Sometimes people have said to me, I'm too open and too approachable, but I don't think you can be. And I really believe that for me, my strength is about investing in people and getting to know people, building relationships and teams, and showing empathy, building trust, and coaching in the way that I support my team. I've also learned the value of being inclusive. When I started at the Trust, there was me on the board as a brown Black person. Now there are 5 of us, and it's been really important. And the diversity of thought, and it's not just about, you know, having people of color, it's also the experiences and the different experiences that are brought. I remember when we were doing the shortlisting, one of my governors, and he's a really nice person, said of one of the candidates that they brought the same, you know, amount of the same kind of experience as I did, and therefore did we really need you know, another person like that on the board? And I gently said that this was a Muslim Asian man, and although he had experience around equality and diversity and working in communities, the communities and his experience was different to mine. And so we had to do a lot of training and development with our governors so that they understood the issues. Being inclusive isn't soft and it's not fluffy. and it's not the nice thing to do. It's the thing you have to do. And it opens us up, it broadens and adds value to our organisation. It's linked to innovation and creativity and directly impacts on productivity and performance. We've seen in research that what leaders say and do makes up to 70% difference about whether someone feels that they are included. So if we as leaders aren't inclusive, then that cascades down through our organization. And I think being an inclusive leader is not just about setting direction or vision, goals or inspiration. All of that is really important, but you also need to reach out and make people feel valued, trusted, and cared for. And we really need to value and understand difference. We need to use all the unique knowledge, talents that and all the potential that those differences bring. And it's not a destination. Having people around the table isn't it. It's a journey, and it requires curiosity, it requires courage, and it requires humility. And we need to drive compassionate leadership and inclusive leadership throughout our NHS and our organisation, and help women from all walks of life unleash and develop their talents through through different initiatives, programs and networks. I recognise my privilege, and the fact that this gives me a voice, and what I need to do is use my position and my voice to amplify the voices of women whose voices are not heard or feel that their voices are not heard. I've learned to know what battles to fight. I've learned that we need to disrupt, and in order to get change, we have to disrupt the system. And spending every second of every day fighting can be exhausting, which is why you need to pick your battles. And sometimes you need to learn when you just need to walk away. And so I've chosen to channel my energy into positively progressing equality, diversity and inclusion, and it will and has and remains at the top of my mine and my organisation's agenda. We've seen what COVID has done globally and the impact it's had on lives and livelihoods, and how the women have been disproportionately impacted. And it's, as I said earlier, it's thrown a stark spotlight on disadvantage, and we need to do better, and we need to change things. We need to build opportunities that build on the opportunities that this horrible pandemic has brought to us through, through mediums like this. And I want to end my story by saying I was asked what I would say to my 18-year-old self about my career journey. And it's something that I guess hindsight's great, isn't it? And our learning is great. And I would say to my 18-year-old self, be who you are, be your authentic self, because you are enough. I think we spend a lot of time thinking that we're not enough, and you are. And as a woman, recognize your power and take your position. I think sometimes we don't see our power, and at his inauguration, Nelson Mandela read out and spoke about, our fear of being powerful, and I think that is a big fear. We often think we're we're scared that we'll be seen as inadequate. I think we're fearful sometimes of living our truth. And so I think it's important to continue to challenge and ask questions. It's important to build your networks. Support for each other is really key. And I would say, if you can network, it's so important to be able to get into those spaces, to be able to be part of those conversations and to be visible. And we need to continue our desire to progress, to see promise in ourselves and in our in others. And we had a development session by Professor Michael West, who has written extensively about compassionate leadership. Amazing, amazing work. And one of the things that he said is you need to be compassionate to yourself, because if we can't show ourselves compassion, then we can't show others compassion. So thank you again for asking me to come and speak. I also, when I'm ever in these spaces, I feel really, really humbled, and as ever happy to take questions, comments, and make connections. If I think Wendy and Abby have my contact details, and I'm happy for them to share them with you. But thank you for taking the time to listen.
Thank you so much, Evelyn. What can we say? I've listened to you many times, and I think every single time I'm always still there thinking about when you speak, where there is so much to take from it, so much to learn. And I'm sure many people on the platform this afternoon will feel the same as well. Thank you so much for that amazing presentation. We have some questions on the chat box before we kind of throw it open to the floor. If I could quickly pick on that. I think some of these things you've mentioned, which I have down in my notes. I know you said so many things, but you talk about organization, how the culture of organization to check if it's ready for change and diversity. And I think that's really, really important as well. And you mentioned as well about we need to recognize the battle to fight and how we fight them as well. And I think for us at the moment, the Heart Trust, we are involved in mentoring, reciprocal mentoring program. And it's interesting when you said as well that what we need is allyship and not a savior. We could go on and on. There's so many to pick from, but I'll go straight to the questions now and I'll let people ask. So there's a question from Deepna. Deepna wants to know what helped you to be yourself within the work environment. And I know you mentioned as well about psychological safety, and Deepna wants to know more about that as well. Thank you.
I think that the last 12 months has I've spent loads of time reflecting, and I came into the organization following someone who was very different from me, and it was hard because the culture that I came in was a culture that wasn't really me, although I had a chief exec who was great. And I sit on different boards, and I questioned why I felt more comfortable in other boardrooms than I did in my own when I was the one that was sat at the end of the table. What was it? And what it was I was trying to live to other people's perceptions of what they thought who I was. And I think I had a coach Um, and being able to talk to someone and just being able to, in that space, to say just how challenging I found um, the whole environment. Because I think sometimes people think that you get to a certain level and everything's great, and you know, you walk into the room and everybody sort of bows because you're the chair. It doesn't work like that. Um, and you still have those battles. I think it's really important to remember who you are and stay true to who you are. Think for me, remembering actually they wanted somebody different, but it goes back to what I said about, was the organization ready for it? Because you can want somebody different, they come in and actually you think, oh well, no, we weren't quite sure we were ready for it. So we've had to do a lot of organizational development, a lot of work around our culture. I have shared a lot of information about me and who I am and my personal lived experience, because that I believe, sharing that showed our staff, that actually I'm human, that some of the issues that they were grappling with, that I was as well. I wrote about what it felt like, shielding, how that had impacted on my mental health. I told them about some of my um, health issues and what that means. Um, Something that I don't think had been done before. And actually, it was quite liberating for me. It meant that I didn't feel I needed to pretend. I don't leave who I am at the front door when we're allowed to leave and go into the office. I have to be who I am, and the organization has to be psychologically safe. When I'm in the boardroom, I need to be able to operate as who I am. I need to be able to say what I want to say without worrying about how others are going to take it. And by that, what I mean is, of course, we operate within, um, respectfully, but it's about recognition and valuing of experience, and you know, having spaces where you can go out, and talk to people. So I've got a lot of networks, outside of home, with other colleagues, with other women friends, both black and white, where I can share my experiences and get strength from them as well.
Thank you very much. And a follow-up question on that. That's still talking about choosing your battles. And the question is, as women, we have many battles and responsibilities, not just at work, but outside work as well. And they want to know, how do you find the energy to progress in work? I mean, after doing the battles outside work and you're at work again, how do you find the energy?
Um, wow. Well, for me, my family is really key. Um, my grandchildren are my sweet spot. Um, and I read a lot. It was interesting, some of the books that Beverly put up before. There was a couple of them that I wrote, but I'd read to, well, I don't know if it's classed as reading because I do a lot of audio books. But I think it is reading because you got to the end of the book, haven't you? Even though you haven't turned the pages. Um, so I listen to a lot of audiobooks. Um, I I've always loved reading, um, and when I can, I spend time with my grandkids. My older kids don't really want to spend time with me; they're too old. Um, but my grandchildren are my sweet spot, and also I think believing in what you do
Mm.
and why you do it. I've got my NHS stuff and the other kind of big stuff that I do, but I also am involved with a food bank, and that kind of really grounds me. It's a tiny organization with a tiny budget, but I work with some incredible people there. So there's lots of spaces for getting that energy. And I also watch really trashy TV. That's my confession.
Thank you very much. And I know I can look at the time now, but I'm just wondering if anyone in the audience, if anyone asks questions, you can just unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question. I can't see all the screen, so yeah.
Hi, can I just come in?
Yeah, go ahead.
Caroline here. It's not really a question, really. It's just really to say just a personal thank you, Evelyn. Yeah, and I've already connected with you on LinkedIn, so please accept, because I'd like to I'd like to connect with you and have quite a bit of discussion outside this. So I really appreciate that. I've already found you and sent you a message, well, a connection message. So yeah, I just wanted to say thank you. Very, very, very inspirational. And I don't know what you've done, but Loreto College now is predominantly ethnic. So maybe you were a trailblazer for the change in the population of that college, because my children go to the school just down the road.
Oh,
so,
brilliant!
Yeah, so brilliant. Thank you very much. Really enjoyed the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Just to quickly say welcome to one of the Freedom to Speak Up ambassadors, Chris Anozie, who is joining the WREN platform for the first time. And welcome to anyone who is, if it's your first time as well. Thank you so much, Evelyn. Wendy, Steph, anything you want to?
Yeah, I just want to say how honored I am to actually be part of today's network. I think for me, it's so inspirational to hear people's journeys, and for me to be part of this connection, to be part of a group of very strong women that I know are championing and leading the way for us is super remarkable. And I'm eternally grateful to have made connections with Evelyn and Beverly, whom I've met previously before. I also wanted to take the opportunity to also thank the men who came today, the men who are within our network and visitors who have actually joined us today, because we talk about allyship and we talk about the importance of actually gender equality and understanding women in their own rights. And it's also important to recognize the men who are there behind us, propping us up and actually cheering us along the way. So for the guys who are actually here today, thank you. And for those who are going to listen to us when this recording's aired, thank you for also listening remotely as well. So I'm really, really sort of pleased that that today has been, we've created a space to recognize strong women. I mean, as we're coming to the end of our session, one of the things that I want to leave with everybody is the words that both our members have actually shared with us today, and also something that the speakers were very, well, there were prominent themes that came through, and I like what both Evelyn and Beverly said, and that is, be true to yourself, live for your truth, and also you are enough, and believe in what you do. These are very, very powerful words where a lot of us in different stages of our career or in different stages of our life, we don't often believe in ourselves. I want you to know, as members of the network, me and Abby, we believe in you. We want you to live your truth, and we very much want for people to continue to live their values. And we're very, very grateful for those messages that was very prominent throughout both our speakers. and the importance of compassion, the importance of looking after yourself, reset and re-energizing are very, very important messages that I took also from both our speakers. So I'm extremely privileged to be sitting amongst all of you today, and I'm very privileged to share this moment with you, and especially to share this moment with Abby. Abby and I have been talking about this for a very long time now, and we are eternally grateful to have both of you here. And Abby, thank you so much for supporting the chair today as well.
I think there any other business, Wendy?
No, I haven't got anything. I don't know if anybody wanted to raise anything.
The next meeting?
So the next meeting, I believe, is on the 8th of April. And what we're going to dedicate that meeting to is supporting our colleagues to understand about fasting. Specifically, as Ramadan is coming up on the 12th, the evening of the 12th of April is the start of Ramadan, and we are dedicating that session for learning a little bit more about fasting and self-care during that period. Cool.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
You can unmute yourself now and
yes.
say farewell to everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Hi, Mildred.